I've always hated Sunday dinners. Not because of the food or the company. Everything about them was polished, proper, pleasant. The plates aligned like soldiers, the wine glasses tall and thin, the linen napkins folded just so. My husband thrived in these settings, where the conversations were safe, predictable, full of talk about work achievements, weather patterns, family updates. It wasn't the gathering itself that made my chest feel tight. It was the ritual of it, the structure, the way we all performed. I had chosen my outfit carefully that night, though I told myself I hadn't. A dark green dress, high neckline, but cut to hug my waist and skim my hips. Simple gold earrings, hair pinned loosely at the back of my neck. Underneath, a black lace bodysuit, delicate, soft against my skin, a secret no one could see. No one except me. I couldn't explain why I needed it. The house smelled of rosemary and baked bread. My husband was at the grill outside, turning chicken breasts with the same precision he used to manage every part of our life. He smiled at me through the glass doors, gave a small wave, and I smiled back. Automatic. Family filled the living room. His sister, her husband, their adult son, his nephew. The one I hadn't seen for months. Older now, broader in the shoulders, easy in his body in a way that hadn't been there before. He was leaning back in the chair, ankle resting on his knee, sipping wine like someone who had just returned from somewhere exciting, but didn't feel the need to brag about it. I tried not to notice how his eyes stayed on me just a moment longer than necessary when I entered the room. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the light. When dinner was served, I sat at my usual place beside my husband. The conversation floated around the table effortlessly. His nephew was charming as always, throwing in a joke here and there that made even the oldest in the family chuckle. He had that way about him, like he was always 2 steps ahead in the conversation, waiting for the right moment to drop something clever. At one point, as I passed the basket of bread, he reached out to take it from me. His fingers brushed against mine, just the slightest contact, and I felt it all the way down my spine. I pulled my hand back too quickly, almost knocking over my glass. He caught my eye, and the corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile exactly, but close. I looked away. The rest of the evening blurred into background noise. Laughter, silverware clinking against plates, the rise and fall of my husband's voice as he told a story I'd heard a dozen times before. I nodded. I smiled. I played my part. But I felt that look burning at the edge of my awareness. Later, when the dishes were cleared and the guests had started to gather their things, I found myself standing by the front door, offering polite goodbyes. He was the last to leave. His gaze held mine as he said, "Thank you for dinner." Everything was perfect. His voice was calm, smooth, but there was a weight behind it that made my skin prickle. When I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it for a moment, my heart beat too loud in my chest. I told myself I was overthinking it, that it was nothing. But when I went to straighten up the hallway, I noticed something small lying near the edge of the rug. A leather bracelet. Simple, worn, familiar. It was his. I held the bracelet between my fingers longer than I should have, running my thumb along the soft, aged leather as if it might explain itself. It didn't. It just lay there, quiet, heavy, leaving me with the absurd responsibility of returning it. I could have told my husband, of course. I could have handed it over with a smile and a shrug. He must have dropped this. You should give it back next time you see him. But I didn't. Instead, I placed it carefully on the edge of the hallway table, near the vase of lilies that had started to wilt. All night, I felt its presence like an unfinished conversation. The next morning passed in its usual rhythm. My husband left early for work, brief kiss on the cheek, keys jingling as he locked the front door. I poured my coffee, scrolled through the news headlines without absorbing a single word. The bracelet was still there, patient, waiting. By midday, I had convinced myself it was only polite to let him know. A message would have been easy. Impersonal, harmless. But my fingers hovered above the screen without typing. There was a thin line between courtesy and invitation, and I wasn't ready to admit which side I was on. When the doorbell rang around 2, I already knew it was him. I didn't rush to open it. I took a breath, smoothed my skirt, glanced at my reflection in the hallway mirror. The faintest touch of lipstick remained from the morning. I told myself I looked composed. He stood there with that same relaxed ease, one hand in his pocket, sunglasses pushed up into his hair. "Forgot something," he said, and the words were simple enough, but his eyes dropped immediately to the bracelet resting on the table beside me. I picked it up slowly, extending it toward him. "You're lucky I noticed." His fingers closed around mine, not just the bracelet, and for a fraction of a second, neither of us let go. His hand was warm, steady. My throat felt too tight, my words sticking somewhere behind my teeth. "I could have texted," he said after a pause, his tone softer now. "But I thought it might be nice." I hated the way my pulse responded to that. I hated the warmth that flushed beneath my collarbone, the way I didn't immediately step back. There was nothing inherently wrong in the words, nothing that couldn't be read as polite. But standing there, so close, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. "I'm sure you have better things to do than come all the way back here for this," I replied, my voice too light, rehearsed. But my hand still rested too near his. He smiled, slow, like he could hear the weight beneath my casual words. "I make time for what I want." There was a silence between us then, thick enough to hold the air still. Outside, the hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street, the faint call of a bird overhead. Inside, the quiet beat of my own heart against my ribs. When he finally took the bracelet from my hand, his fingers brushed the inside of my wrist. It was deliberate. Not forceful, not crude, just enough to leave the impression of heat on my skin. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move right away. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on his. I told myself to turn away, to step back, to close the door and end this moment before it grew into something else. But I didn't. When he leaned forward, the kiss wasn't sudden. It wasn't rushed or hungry. It was slow, intentional, a soft meeting of mouths that felt impossibly gentle for how much it took from me. I didn't stop him. And when he pulled away, his eyes searched mine, as if waiting for me to speak first. I couldn't. My hands were shaking. "I shouldn't have done that," he said quietly, though he didn't look sorry. I still couldn't speak. I stood frozen, my back pressed lightly against the doorframe, my fingers curled into my palm as if holding on to something invisible. By the time the door closed behind him, the air in the house felt different. Charged. I leaned against the wood again, eyes closed, trying to slow my breathing. But no amount of deep breaths could steady the way my body responded. I wasn't overthinking it. It had happened. And I knew, already, I didn't want it to be the last time. The next few days passed with a strange kind of weight pressing down on everything. The house felt quieter, though nothing in the routine had changed. My husband moved through the rooms with the same steady calm, his attention divided between emails and evening news, his touches on my shoulder soft, habitual, absent of urgency. I answered his questions, made dinner, folded laundry with methodical precision. But inside, my thoughts were nowhere near him. I kept replaying that moment at the door. The warmth of his lips, the steadiness in his gaze afterward, the deliberate way he hadn't apologized. It wasn't the kiss itself that haunted me. It was the fact that neither of us had stumbled, neither of us had laughed it off or tried to erase it. We had simply let it hang there between us, like something waiting to be picked back up. I told myself I was overreacting, that it had been one kiss, that it didn't mean anything beyond a stupid, heat-of-the-moment mistake. But the truth was, I couldn't make myself believe it. I avoided checking my phone, half expecting a message from him, half dreading it. When I finally looked, there was nothing. The silence stretched longer than I liked. Longer than I thought it would. By the weekend, I had almost convinced myself it would stay that way, that he had come to his senses, that we would both quietly step back into our roles and pretend nothing had ever shifted. But then came Sunday dinner again. Same setting, same faces, same ritual. Except I wasn't the same. When he arrived, I felt it immediately. The awareness of his presence, the slight pause in my breath as he entered the room. He smiled easily, greeting everyone. That effortless charm disarming as always. If he felt the tension, he didn't show it. And that infuriated me almost as much as it relieved me. The evening unfolded much like the last, polite laughter, familiar conversations. But under the table, my hands were clenched tightly in my lap. Every time his gaze passed over me, even briefly, I felt it like a spark against my skin. And then came the moment I wasn't prepared for. A joke, harmless to everyone else, about how hard it is to stay fit once you cross a certain age. My husband laughed, nodded in agreement, patted his stomach. But his nephew, leaning forward just enough to catch my eye, smiled and said, "Some people manage to look better the older they get." It was tossed out casually, light enough to pass as innocent. But his eyes didn't leave mine as he said it. His expression calm, unreadable, except for the barest lift of one eyebrow. No one noticed. Or at least, they pretended not to. I felt my cheeks flush, the warmth creeping up my neck before I could stop it. I lowered my gaze to my plate, forcing my expression to stay neutral, my hand tightening around the stem of my wine glass. For the rest of the evening, he didn't say much more to me directly, but the damage was done. The comment sat between us like a thread pulled loose from the edge of a sweater, small enough to ignore until you realize it could unravel the whole thing. When the plates were cleared, I lingered in the kitchen longer than necessary, stacking dishes slowly, letting the running water cover the sound of my racing thoughts. My husband stepped in once or twice to grab more plates, pressed a soft kiss to my temple in passing, never sensing the chaos beneath my calm. I could feel him watching me from the other room, not my husband. Him. When the evening finally ended and the front door clicked shut behind the last of the guests, I let my shoulders drop, the tension sliding off my back like a coat I'd worn too long. It should have ended there. It could have. But as I gathered the last of the glasses from the living room, I noticed my phone lighting up on the counter. A single message. "You looked incredible tonight. Still can't get you out of my head." I stared at the screen longer than I should have, fingers hovering over the keys, every part of me screaming to delete it. But I didn't. Instead, I read it again, and again. I didn't respond right away. I put the phone down, walked away from it, poured myself a glass of water with hands that trembled just enough to make me furious at myself. I kept repeating in my head that I was in control of this, that nothing had really happened. A kiss, a message, nothing irreversible. And yet, there I was, standing in my kitchen like a schoolgirl, breath shallow, stomach tight, waiting for the screen to light up again. It didn't. Not that night. Not the next morning. The silence felt like a challenge, or maybe like punishment. I tried to carry on as usual. Grocery shopping, laundry, the small cycles of daily life that usually kept me anchored. But my mind spun circles around itself, restless, searching for a foothold. My body betrayed me in small ways, lingering too long in the mirror before pulling my hair back, choosing blouses that draped a little softer over my skin, running fingers absent-mindedly along the edge of my neckline as if recalling the ghost of that kiss. By the third day, the tension inside me had curdled into irritation. At him, at myself, at the absurdity of it all. I caught myself checking my phone too often, pretending I wasn't. I almost convinced myself I had imagined the weight of his attention. And then the message came. "Coffee?" Just coffee. "Tomorrow, noon, same cafe." 4 words. Casual on the surface, but not really. I should have said no. Should have deleted it. Should have laughed at the audacity of the offer. but instead my fingers hovered above the screen only a moment before typing, "Okay." The morning of the meeting, I found myself staring at my closet longer than necessary. The logic of it was stupid. I knew it, but I couldn't help it. I reached for something soft, familiar, a cream-colored sweater, jeans that fit snug at the waist. No perfume, just a hint of moisturizer with sandalwood and citrus. Subtle, harmless. I arrived 10 minutes early, chose a table by the window where the late autumn sun cut soft lines across the floor, ordered tea instead of coffee. My heart raced, ridiculous and adolescent, but outwardly I looked composed. When he walked in, he looked the same as always, relaxed, confident, like someone who had never questioned whether he belonged exactly where he was. He spotted me immediately, smiled, made his way across the room without hesitation. I didn't stand to greet him. I stayed seated, hands folded on the table, keeping myself still. He sat down across from me, leaned back just slightly in the chair as if to make clear that this wasn't anything inappropriate. Just two adults, talking. But his eyes never left mine. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds longer than was comfortable. The space between us hummed with something unsaid. "You didn't answer my last message," he finally said, his voice low, calm. I kept my tone even. I wasn't sure there was anything worth saying. He tilted his head, one corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. "But you're here." I didn't reply right away. My fingers traced the rim of my teacup, slowly, grounding myself in the simple motion. I hated how much I wanted to lean into the ease of his voice, the warmth of his gaze. "This is a mistake," I said quietly, but even as the words left my mouth, they tasted hollow. "Maybe," he answered, "but you came." There was no accusation in his tone, no triumph, just fact. And the quiet certainty of someone who already knew the answer to the question he hadn't asked. The conversation drifted then, as if we could pretend we hadn't already crossed a line. Work, family, safe topics. But even when his words stayed neutral, his eyes stayed hungry, watching, waiting. I finished my tea too quickly, set the cup down with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have in the quiet space between us. "I should go," I said, reaching for my bag. He didn't argue, didn't press, only nodded once and stood as I did, giving me the space to walk away. But as I turned, his voice followed me, steady and certain. "I want to see you again." I didn't answer. I just walked out into the cool afternoon air, my chest aching with something I couldn't name. I didn't sleep well after that meeting. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind circled back to the way he had looked at me across that small cafe table. Steady, open, without apology. There was no pressure in his words, no manipulation. And maybe that was what made it worse. He hadn't needed to push. He knew I was already leaning toward him without a single hand extended. For the next few days, I kept myself busy on purpose. Cleaning out the closet, reorganizing kitchen drawers, pointless tasks just to fill the spaces where my thoughts might drift back to him. My husband noticed my sudden energy and called it productive. I let him. I smiled and kissed his cheek when he praised me for finally tackling the junk drawer project. He didn't notice the way my hands shook sometimes when I held a coffee mug too long, lost in my head. But the silence didn't last. By the end of the week, another message. Simple, careful, thoughtful. "I'm in town longer than I planned. Would you have lunch with me?" I stared at it for too long, and then, as if my fingers moved without my permission, I replied, "Where?" It was a quiet Italian place just outside the city, tucked between an antique bookstore and a florist. Nothing flashy, nothing that drew attention. I arrived on time, dressed simply again. Dark jeans, a soft ivory blouse, a thin gold chain at my neck that I touched more often than I should have while waiting. He was already there when I walked in, sitting at a table near the back where the light was softer. When our eyes met, I felt the same drop in my stomach. the familiar rush of heat to my face. His smile was warm but small, like he knew exactly how hard I had fought myself not to be here. The meal started quietly. Safe topics again. How work was going, whether the family was planning another trip for the holidays. But underneath it, always was the tension. Not sharp or aggressive, just persistent, humming between words. I reached for the breadbasket at the same moment he did. Our fingers touched, brief, light, but my hand didn't pull away this time. Neither did his. The contact held, just a second too long. When I finally looked up from the table, I found his eyes fixed on me, unblinking. "I haven't stopped thinking about you," he said softly. There was nothing charming in the way he said it. No grin, no playful tone. Just truth. I should have pushed my chair back. I should have walked out. But I stayed exactly where I was, my hands folded tightly in my lap now, my throat too dry to form any easy reply. "I'm not trying to make this complicated for you," he continued. "I know what this is. But I also know what I want." The weight of those words settled between us like a stone dropped into water. No ripples, no movement. Just the heavy reality of it. The check arrived, and I felt my breath catch when he reached for it without asking. A small gesture, but deliberate. As if caring for the details of the moment meant something more than it should. When we stepped outside into the soft afternoon light, the air smelled faintly of rain. The street was quiet, only a few people passing by, wrapped up in their own lives, not looking our way. "I shouldn't be here," I said finally, the words catching against the knot in my throat. "But you are." There was no accusation in his voice, no anger, only that same steady certainty that had both drawn me in and terrified me from the start. We stood there for a moment, suspended between decision and desire, the space between our bodies too small to be innocent. His hand reached up slowly, fingers brushing a loose strand of hair from my cheek. A simple gesture, but my body leaned into it before I could stop myself. The kiss that followed wasn't soft like the first. It wasn't hesitant. It was urgent, hungry, inevitable. My hands found the edge of his jacket before I realized I was even reaching for him. His fingers pressed lightly against my waist, not pulling, just resting there as if waiting for me to close the distance. I didn't pull away. Not right away. When I finally stepped back, my breath was shallow, my heart pounding loud enough to drown out the sound of the passing cars. "I don't know what I'm doing," I whispered. His eyes softened, but he didn't let go of my hand. "I think you do," he said. "You just don't want to admit it yet." I stayed there, frozen, my fingers still laced with his, feeling the heat of his palm against mine as the afternoon closed in around us. The drive home felt longer than it should have been. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, gripping harder than necessary, eyes fixed on the road ahead but barely seeing it. My mind replayed the scene outside that quiet little restaurant again and again. The feel of his lips, the steadiness of his hand against my waist, the certainty in his voice. There had been no games in his touch, no desperation, only want. And that want had found its echo in me. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my chest ached from the effort it took to keep myself together. The house stood there as it always did. Calm, welcoming, perfectly still. My husband's car wasn't in its place. A small mercy. I needed the quiet, the space to breathe, to pretend I was still the person I had been just a few weeks ago. I moved through the house as if on autopilot, dropping my keys on the kitchen counter, placing my bag neatly on the chair by the door. Every action small, controlled. But my body betrayed me. My hands trembled when I reached for a glass of water. The pit of my stomach remained tight, knotted, alive with the memory of the way his hands had settled so effortlessly on my body, as if they belonged there. I sat at the kitchen table, staring down at my phone. There were no new messages. I told myself I was relieved. I told myself it was better this way. Cleaner. But beneath the surface of those thoughts ran another current, quieter but insistent, asking why I felt disappointed. For the rest of the evening, I moved through the motions of my life like someone wearing a mask. I listened to my husband talk about his day, nodded in the right places, laughed where I was supposed to. He touched my shoulder as he passed me on his way to the living room. A gentle squeeze, familiar and soft. I smiled. I kissed him goodnight when he leaned toward me later, the same way I always did. But my lips felt cold against his. Sleep didn't come easily. I turned over in bed again and again, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me, wondering if he could sense the distance I felt inside my own skin. I thought about reaching for him, about closing the gap between us out of guilt, out of habit. But my body refused. The warmth, the ache, the need, they weren't here in this room. The next morning, I avoided my reflection. I dressed without care, tied my hair back in a loose knot, skipped the lipstick I usually applied without thinking. I spent most of the day cleaning, organizing things that didn't need organizing, trying to find some way to drain the restless energy that had settled deep into my bones. But no amount of tidying could quiet the thoughts that pressed in around me. By late afternoon, the silence between us broke. My phone lit up on the counter. I'm sorry if I crossed a line. I stared at the message longer than I should have. The words were measured, respectful, but they didn't undo anything. They didn't make the kiss disappear. They didn't make the longing in my body retreat. I typed out a reply twice, deleting each one before sending anything. Finally, I settled on the truth, the one I couldn't swallow down. You didn't cross a line I wasn't already standing on. His answer came faster than I expected. I won't push, but I'm not going to pretend I don't want to see you again. I put the phone down, walked away from it, came back 10 minutes later, picked it up again. I told myself to let it be, to leave the conversation unfinished. But my fingers moved before my resolve could catch up. I'm free tomorrow afternoon. No flirtation, no exclamation points. Just the fact of it. His reply was simple. Tell me where. I sat back in my chair, breath unsteady, the weight of my own decision settling over me. There had been no coercion, no manipulation, only the quiet acknowledgement of something we had both allowed to grow. And now, I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. I spent the morning convincing myself I wouldn't go. I cleaned the kitchen twice, rearranged the spice rack, answered emails I'd ignored all week. I told myself I had every intention of canceling, that this was the last reckless flicker of something foolish, something I could still smother if I moved quickly enough. But my body betrayed me again. I still stood in front of the mirror too long, still changed my outfit 3 times before settling on something that looked thoughtless but wasn't. A soft navy sweater that followed the curve of my waist, dark pants, hair left down in loose waves that looked casual but had taken 20 minutes to get right. No perfume, but a light touch of the lotion he'd noticed once before. I chose the cafe near the edge of town, a quiet place tucked between a bookstore and a pharmacy. Safe enough to meet, but removed enough to give us space. I sat at a table near the back, my fingers wrapped tightly around the edge of my cup as if holding on to something solid could keep me grounded. When he walked in, my body responded before my mind could intervene. My chest tightened, my breath caught. He wore the same calm expression as always, but his eyes found me immediately, and they softened. I hated how much I'd missed that look. He didn't rush, took his time ordering, greeting the barista with a polite nod before walking over to me, hands tucked casually into the pockets of his jacket. Thank you for coming, he said quietly as he sat across from me. I forced a small smile, but the tightness in my throat made it hard to speak. I wanted to pretend I was still in control, that this hadn't already gone too far. But the longer I looked at him, the more impossible it became to lie to myself. We sat there for a while, talking about everything except what mattered. The weather, work, family obligations. He asked about my plans for the holidays, and I answered too quickly, deflecting, dodging. but he didn't press. He just listened, leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table, eyes never leaving my face. And then he shifted the conversation with one sentence. "You don't have to be afraid of wanting more." The words landed between us like a dropped stone. I felt my body tense, my hand tightening around the ceramic of the coffee cup until my knuckles went white. I looked away, out the window at the gray sky and the slow shuffle of people walking past on the street. "I'm not afraid," I answered, but my voice was too soft to sound convincing. He didn't argue. He just waited, watching me with that same quiet steadiness that had undone me from the very beginning. "I'm married," I added finally. The words heavy, as if saying them out loud might somehow make them stronger, might anchor me back into the version of my life where all of this stayed beneath the surface. "I know," he said. And he meant it. There was no pleading in his tone, no desperation, only understanding. But he didn't apologize for wanting me. He didn't offer me the easy escape of saying we should stop. That was the worst part. He respected my choice enough not to make it for me. The silence between us stretched long, filled only by the soft hum of the cafe around us. When I finally met his gaze again, I felt the air shift, that subtle pull between us drawing tighter. "I can't do this halfway," I whispered. "I'm not built for games." "Neither am I," he replied. It would have been easier if he'd pushed, if he'd demanded, but he didn't. He gave me space, gave me the choice. I stood to leave, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But as I reached for my coat, his hand brushed lightly against mine. Barely there, just enough contact to make my skin burn. "You forgot something," he said softly. I turned, confused, and he reached into the pocket of his jacket, pulling out the sunglasses he had left at my house the week before. He held them out to me, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. I stared at them for a moment, frozen, then slowly took them from his hand. "Thank you," I murmured. But what I meant was, I'm not ready to walk away. And he heard it. I saw it in the way his gaze held mine. Steady, certain, patient. The weight of the glasses in my hand felt heavier than it should have, like they tethered me to a choice I still wasn't brave enough to name out loud. But as I stepped outside into the crisp air, I didn't let go of them. And I knew I wasn't done. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. My life resumed its usual pace. The errands, the conversations with my husband about dinner plans and bills, the safe routines we had built together over the years. From the outside, nothing had changed. I played my role well. Maybe too well. But inside, I carried the weight of that moment in the cafe like a stone in my pocket. Every time my hand brushed against the sunglasses tucked into the side pocket of my bag, I felt it again. The choice I had refused to name. The line I had already stepped over, even if only with a glance. A word. A kiss. I told myself I could stop this, that I still had control. But every time I tried to focus on the safety of my life, my mind drifted back to the sound of his voice, the steadiness in his eyes, the way he hadn't begged or persuaded, just waited. And waiting, somehow, was worse. Because it meant he trusted I would come back on my own. And I did. It wasn't planned. Or maybe it was, somewhere deep beneath the surface where I wasn't brave enough to admit it. A text that began with the illusion of innocence. A question about the sunglasses, whether he still wanted them back. His answer was immediate, but careful. "If you'd like to return them, I can meet you wherever's easy for you." As if either of us believed this was about sunglasses, I suggested the park near the edge of the city, where the walking trails dipped beneath the trees and the late autumn leaves had started to fall in thick golden carpets along the paths. Public enough not to feel dangerous, private enough to allow the space between us to tighten without words. I wore my hair down again, though I told myself it didn't matter. I chose a fitted black coat that cinched at the waist, a scarf I wrapped too many times, as if the fabric could protect me from more than just the wind. Beneath the coat, the silk of my blouse felt too soft against my skin, as if my body already knew what my mind refused to admit. He was there before me, leaning against the rail near the edge of the small lake, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. His eyes found me as I approached, and the warmth there hit me harder than I expected. Neither of us spoke at first. The breeze moved gently between us, carrying the scent of earth and water and fallen leaves. I reached into my bag, pulling out the sunglasses, holding them out to him like a peace offering. "You could have kept them," he said, his voice soft, unreadable. I thought about it. The honesty of my answer surprised even me. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, but not too close. Respectful of the boundary I kept shifting but never quite defining. His eyes searched mine, looking for something I couldn't bring myself to say aloud. "I didn't come here to talk about sunglasses," I added, my voice quieter now. He nodded, his gaze steady. "I didn't expect you to." There it was again. The patience, the calm certainty that made my heart ache. He never pushed, never demanded. Just stood there, present, waiting. "I'm trying to hold this together," I whispered, the words barely more than breath. "I know," he replied, "but I also know it's tearing you apart." I hated how right he was, how easily he could see the war inside me, how naked I felt beneath that calm exterior. He didn't reach for me. Not right away. He gave me the space to choose, the space to step closer or to turn away. And in that space, I broke. I moved first. Closed the distance between us, my hands finding the front of his jacket, gripping the fabric tight as if I could hold back the avalanche that had already begun to fall inside me. When his arms came around me, they didn't pull. They held. Firm, steady, his hands resting lightly against my back as if he knew that anything more might shatter me entirely. "I'm not asking you to leave your life," he said quietly near my ear. "I'm just asking you to stop pretending this isn't real." My fingers tightened against the wool of his coat, my forehead pressed against his chest, eyes closed as I tried to steady the rush of my breathing. I wanted to argue, to push back. But the words wouldn't come, because he was right. And the worst part, the part that burned beneath my skin, was that I didn't want him to stop asking. The lie tasted familiar by now. The soft reassurance I gave myself each morning while my husband kissed me goodbye. The polite smile I wore through breakfasts and errands. The steady hand I offered as we planned the coming holidays. Everything on the surface remained perfectly intact. And yet, beneath the calm, there was the quiet, relentless thrum of something I could no longer silence. After the park, I told myself it had to end. That whatever this was, this pull, this ache, this dangerous softness, I could pack it away like the sunglasses, slide it into a drawer somewhere out of sight. But the ache didn't fade. It grew heavier, louder, filling the spaces where my thoughts used to be. I avoided texting him, deleted the thread twice, blocked his number once, and then, shamefully, unblocked it the next day. But I still knew the pattern of his words by heart, the rhythm of his sentences, the warmth beneath their calm. I lasted a week. The message I sent was brief. No pleasantries, no careful detours. Just the address of the hotel near the highway, the room number, the time. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. I told my husband I had errands to run, a meeting in the city. I kissed his cheek the way I always did. Smiled as I grabbed my bag from the chair by the door, my heart pounding so hard it felt as if my ribs might crack beneath it. The drive to the hotel was a blur. My hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, but still they shook. When I parked, I sat in the car for 5 full minutes, eyes fixed on the dashboard, willing myself to turn back. But my body stayed frozen, as if it already knew there would be no going back. The lobby was bright, almost cheerful, with the soft hum of distant music and the quiet shuffle of guests checking in. checking out. The clerk didn't look at me twice as I passed. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, as if the burn in my legs might somehow absolve me of what I was about to do. At the door, I paused. My hand hovered above the handle, waiting for some last-minute surge of clarity to stop me. It didn't come. When I stepped inside, he was already there. He stood near the window, hands in his pockets, back straight, waiting. Not pacing, not anxious. Just waiting. His eyes found me immediately, and in that gaze, all the pretense fell away. There was no surprise. No need for words. I closed the door behind me, leaning back against it, my chest rising too fast, my fingers trembling at my sides. I almost didn't come, I said, my voice too soft to sound convincing. But you did. The space between us held still for a moment longer, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. Then, slowly, he crossed the room toward me, not rushing, not urgent. His hands reached up, brushing gently against the sides of my face, his thumbs resting just beneath my jaw. He kissed me carefully at first, as if waiting for me to stop him. But I didn't. My hands moved to his chest, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. His lips pressed harder against mine, one hand sliding down to the small of my back, anchoring me there as if he could feel the fight still flickering inside me. I don't remember when the tears started. Somewhere between the pull of his mouth and the weight of his hands, they came without warning, soft and silent, running down my cheeks as my body gave up the last of its resistance. He felt it, paused just enough to pull back, his eyes searching mine with that same unbearable patience. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who the apology was for. He didn't let go. His hand moved to my cheek, thumb wiping the tear away, his lips pressing softly against my forehead. "You don't have to be," he said. We stood there like that for what felt like hours, his arms around me, my head against his chest, my breath shaking as the weight of it all settled between us. I knew what I was doing. I knew the cost. But for the first time in too long, I also knew what it felt like to be wanted, to be seen, and no part of me was ready to let that go.